podcast, I spoke with Kane Thiede. He's a friend of mine who I believe to be a strong individual, an intelligent individual, and who has inspired me to try to be someone that's just more uniquely myself. Please enjoy whatever you listen to of this conversation. Hey Kane, are you ready? How are you
Yeah, I'm
doing?
ready.
You're ready.
I'm pretty good. How are you?
Cool. I'm doing good, man. Thanks for making time to do this with me. Thanks for cutting some time out of your life and your day to chat.
No problem at all. Yeah, it's cool to see you and catch up a little bit.
For sure. Um, okay, so I think the very first thing I want to talk about is you and some of your travels. When I'm looking at some of your Instagram photos, it looks like sometimes you're traveling by jumping on trains, sometimes you're going to other countries, and traveling by train as well, and jumping on cars, doing some hitchhiking, and jumping on trains to get from one place to another. For me, as someone that's very anxious and paranoid and fearful, like I'm a very fearful human, where do you
Mhm.
muster up the courage to jump on a train, to hitchhike, um, and to kind of like see more of the world through that path of travel, so to speak?
Yeah, I definitely have been like I don't know, I guess like an adrenaline type of person. I guess that helps. But I mean, going way back, I definitely started just kind of bumming around traveling through hitchhiking. First, I was probably like 21 when really started doing that. And it was a little nerve-wracking, but it was the California coast, it was like the kind of like the stereotypical route that people go up the West Coast. It was like Highway 1 and 101 and all that. Um, so I had good experiences with people and um kind of worked on my ability to connect with people I'd never met before that way, and um just had a great trip, and that just kind of built up the some confidence, and I realized that I just like having adventures like that and just kind of kept the motivation going. And when I met people that were into hopping freight trains, they kind of would tell me stories about it and had all these insane stories. If you talk to anyone who has hop trains a lot, they usually have some wicked stories. And I just kind of thought it was awesome and wanted to do that too. And the more people I met who had done that, they just kind of gave me pointers and stuff, and I eventually hopped a train in Montana. It was actually after I met you when I moved out of California, um, and I did that by myself, which was pretty nuts. But the reason I had the confidence to do that was because my friend sent me like a little Google snapshot with the little red pin,
Yeah, on where
showing
to
me
get on, where to get off, that
us,
kind of thing.
yeah, like a little satellite image of where to wait around and kind of hang out in the bushes. And
Yeah.
it was, I mean, the guy really knew what he was doing, so it was a perfect spot. And it was cool because that route went from Whitefish, Montana, and it went east. And when it goes east, there it goes right through Glacier National Park, which was sick to just kind of go
Was it
through
beautiful?
such. Yeah, it was awesome. It was dark. It was getting to be nighttime, so I didn't see as much as I
As
could have if it
clearly,
was
yeah.
light. But it was crazy though, because it's just that part of kind of northwestern Montana is some of the best scenery you can see in the States. It was awesome. Um,
And you're going through areas that's not always adjacent to a car road, so you're getting different views probably than
yeah,
most people
that's
get.
one of the main. Yeah, that's one of the main things is there's not they don't always follow roads, and
Yeah.
trains preceded our highway system and our roads that we have. They were built first, so they were kind of built with. I mean, a lot of times if they're going through mountains, they're along rivers and creeks, kind of like how roads are. But there's a lot of back routes where there's not a road in sight, and it's like an alternative view that you can see. It's pretty awesome.
So are you kind of more of the mindset that like if I look at other countries in the world, there's people hopping on trains all over the place. But I feel like
Yeah.
in America, things are a bit more strict. Is your mindset kind of more of like people should be able to hitchhike, people should be able to jump on trains, but at their own risk. They can't sue anybody. That if they're doing that kind of action, then if something happens to them, that they took that consequence and that's their own issue at their, is that kind of your perspective or no?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the idea of like trying to sue uh,
Yeah.
a rail company for like
Yeah.
trespassing and then getting on a train and
Exactly.
being
Yeah.
like, "Ah, I hurt myself."
But
That's kind of like
there are
really
people that
ridiculous.
would do that kind of thing.
Yeah,
You
totally.
know
There
there
are.
would
That'd
be.
be funny.
Okay.
Yeah,
Um,
totally. No, yeah, use at your own risk for sure.
yeah.
And I
It's kind
mean,
of like
in
skateboard
hitchhiking, it's like,
parks, so to speak. Like people could try to sue the local government for getting hurt at a skateboard park, but like there's a certain risk, you know, by just
totally.
yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is like you've studied a bit and worked a bit with permaculture and with Cob building. Um, what about permaculture and Cob building has and before we talk about this, maybe you can
Mhm.
inform the listener just in case they're not aware of what permaculture is briefly and what Cob House building is. But what about these two things spoke to you the most when you're kind of trying to practice them or study them?
Right. In terms of permaculture, the natural building part of it, because there's a few different focuses within permaculture. Um, there's growing actual plants, there's growing food crops, there's designing systems in and around your house and like adjoining houses to systems meaning like electricity, sewage, water, all the systems you need to keep like a house functional. Um, Keeping those systems as low impact as possible on the neighborhood, like using gray water collection, diverting that into garden spaces to water plants instead of just having gray water go down the storm drain, for instance. That's like a simple example. Or like
Yeah.
a big one is like composting human waste instead of also putting it into a sewer system in order to use for let it decompose and use for manure years in the future. That was like
Yeah, which
something that
many
people did.
ancestors did. There's like a lot of things. It's almost like going back to like lots of different traditional cultures and stealing or taking their best ideas and then incorporating it into a more complex system of like, is that correct? And but there's also like new science and new thought as well. Or am
Yeah,
is
I thought of it more as a modern thing with permaculture. Just through my lens, it was kind of like
okay.
a way to kind of mitigate all the environmental damage we're doing with the way we live already and trying to reverse some of that and keep it lower impact in using alternative energy sources and just kind of like a lot of it was managing waste, like I was saying, just collecting rainwater, for instance. And yeah, but to the natural building part, that was what kind of grabbed my attention the most
Yeah,
with
so Cob
permaculture.
House building and natural building, you guys are using straw, you're using what, clay or is it
Clay
mud?
and straw.
Clay and
Clay
straw.
and straw are the main ingredients of cob,
Okay.
and they're just two ingredients that compact with each other in a way that the straw kind of gives the clay like a material backbone. If you think of straw as like this a rigid kind of straw, and you're packing clay and straw together to a point where you kind of get it in onto a tarp or a surface and you pack it together, you mix it all together, and then you kind of scoop it together onto the structure you're building. And as you pack the clay down, it kind of locks into the straw. The clay compresses into the straw because it's still malleable, and the straw kind of holds it all together, um, like a kind of like if you ever poured concrete around rebar. The rebar
Okay.
provides like a rigid support, and the concrete is the fluid that goes around it and then eventually hardens. That's kind of the best like metaphor for it.
Okay, and I was thinking
Um,
like have
yeah.
you since you built you're practicing building with Cob, have you found any like practical uses for it at like a small scale thing, for example, like building a little like a chicken hut or building like a compost pile unit where you can pour the compost into it,
Mm,
or not really. Um,
yeah, a small scale thing, the best um what I always thought was cool was like honestly just like a cob oven that you could build. You know, a lot
okay,
of
yeah,
because the permaculture course that I took, I got a PDC, which is a permaculture design certificate. It's like a certificate you get after a certain number of hours at a class. And I did it in British Columbia, Canada.
yeah,
And up there, their building codes are pretty different than in California and the West Coast or whatever. So there were a lot of people with Cob buildings on their properties in that they were living in or just using for guest houses or storage or whatever. There are Cob buildings everywhere out there. It was cool. And yeah, so they're great because they keep spaces cool in the summer and warm in the winter because they're really well insulated. Um, Depending on how thick you make like the walls of the structure,
yeah.
it's
And
kind of just like a natural insulating material. There's no, harmful
chemicals or,
kind of like
oh, yeah,
carcinogenic materials like how we used to build homes with asbestos, and
yeah,
decided that was not a good idea in the 70s and 80s. Um, or people have allergies from mold that lives in wooden walls of homes in more humid areas and they get sick. That some people can develop sicknesses from mold and not even know it in wooden structures. So you kind of miss out on a lot of opportunity to have like kind of harmful um just harmful things in your building. But yeah, anyway, like the Cob oven was cool because it's a small scale project you could do in like a short amount of time, and you just build like a circular structure with a leading up from the ground and form it into a dome on top and then build a platform. And yeah, you can make like pizza or whatever you want in a oven,
that's rad.
a wood fired oven.
So let's talk about punk culture and hippie culture. For you, what, let's talk about hippie culture first and then punk culture. What about the hippie culture speaks to your heart the most? And then can you answer that same question again with the counterculture known as punk, the punk movement? Um,
Sure.
so let's talk about hippies first. What about that
Yeah.
hippie movement really speaks to your heart and mind the most and like excites or inspires you?
Um, yeah, I would say they're both like punks and hippies are I kind of think of them as like two sides of really same coin kind of thing. Just kind of like an identity kind of based idea that people gravitate towards when they're feeling deeply kind of not at ease with the status quo or discontent with the status quo or not being fulfilled socially in some way and needing connection with people maybe not really sure why or um and just kind of feeling like a black sheep kind of thing. um for hippie culture, I guess, like kind of met more who people I would call hippies when I was younger, maybe like teens, 20s, uh especially traveling and hitchhiking and doing all of that. And while doing permaculture courses or the permaculture course, there are a lot of people I would call hippies too, because they're into, you know, trying to make less of a impact environmentally. And I guess the thing that's closest to my heart about like a hippie culture is just being super openly warm and accepting of people, no matter how long you've known them. Not kind of like lessens the feeling of being a stranger in a new group of people, feeling accepted right off the bat kind of thing, as long as you're a kind person and not doing anything harmful to anyone. And I guess the level of sharing and kind of like an expectedness to be open and share resources, food or shelter or whatever with people. Again, like no matter if they're a stranger or not. Yeah, that would I would say is closest to my heart with
That's
being
beautiful.
around hippies, yeah. And then for punks, it's kind of similar, honestly. Um, but just the, I guess, not being willing to, what is it about punks? It's just, it's like not succumbing to social pressure, I guess, in the simplest form. It's just not like just feeling, I don't know, feeling different and gravitating towards punk culture is a big thing for a lot of people.
Is
I don't know,
part of
it's
it
kind of hard.
is it part of it having the courage to live in alignment with certain values that maybe are uh not necessarily in accord with the current traditional values or contemporary values that the populace or more of the population is living in alignment with. So it's like being willing to go against the grain and live in alignment with your heart, mind, and with certain thought processes that you 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 truly feel are correct in how you want to live your life. And even though that may uh kind of be, cause you to live a life of more friction at times, uh, so to speak, because
Yeah, yeah,
it seems like
exactly. It's,
yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
or yeah, yeah, you said it really well. It's just, it's living against whatever the grain is, whatever that social norm that you really just don't align with at all.
Yeah,
Whether it's, you're queer or you're gay and you've never felt very accepted, or you don't want to have kids and your family is very much expecting you to have kids, or you're not religious and your family is religious and the people you grew up with are, and you, whatever that thing is, it makes you kind of feel like that black sheep kind of feeling it.
yeah.
And it's kind of just embracing that being different and just kind of saying fuck it. And I mean, there's, and yeah, just not being afraid to like stick out like a sore thumb and just live the life the way you want. But the caveat is like, while being very tolerant of others' choices, um, being tolerant of difference is an important thing. And then, and not judging people for superficial things, not oppressing anyone. Um, there's a huge political aspect to punk too. Um, and then the music, of course, but the music is kind of like ever changing, or like there's music and culture that can be punk without specifically being like Sex Pistols or The Damned or something kind of punk, like that kind of typical punk music you would listen to. But yeah,
Um, okay, so if you want to speak more on punk or hippie culture, you're welcome to. But I have one question. This one may be a little bit more difficult, because for me it's like a little bit more it's harder for me if I were to be given this question. I don't know how I'd answer it. But like if we look back at the hippie counterculture movement and the punk counterculture movement, they have their influences on today and the counterculture of today and those who are to some degree or another living in alignment with the counterculture of today. But how can you kind of like see anything in particular about, let's say, the counterculture movements of today that there's anything like specifically different about them than, let's say, in the past when the punk and hippie cultures were first emerging? Like, is contemporary counterculture today any different from like the traditional arising of the hippie and punk movements? And if so, how? If you can't answer this one, we can just cut this out of the podcast. It's a kind of a difficult.
yeah, definitely. There's a lot to say about that. They're definitely different. Um, like I feel like any kind of social movement, politically charged social movement, especially like the hippie movement of the mid and late 60s, was a lot of that was kind of spurred on by activists responding to um, the U.S. being involved in Vietnam and not wanting military in Vietnam and protesting against that war, or um, responding to a lot of social changes in the 60s and everything with the civil rights movement a few years prior and everything. Um, just a lot of turmoil in the 60s. Um, yeah, it was just an immediate consequence of that kind of chaotic era. And I would say nowadays, like that immediacy of everything, I don't know, it's just kind of been diluted a bit over the years, I would say, where
Can you
it's
speak
kind of
more
more
on
of a,
diluted? What do you mean by diluted?
yeah, like a lot of hippie culture now is kind of like rides on, I don't know, like people following whatever remnants of the band the Grateful Dead is doing nowadays. Like with like a lot of hippies that I met when I was younger were people on the road following like the band Further or something, which is like
Yeah,
a
some kind of
couple of the members of
psychedelic
Grateful.
rock band.
Yeah, just like following them around and kind of just like, you know, having a great time exploring or whatever, but not, there's no politically charged like aspect to that. There's not
They're not
really
like
like
trying to
any,
make societal changes. They're more just enjoying life and
yeah,
trying to be loving and trying to have fun and being part of a positive culture, so to speak.
yeah, and yeah, totally. And on that note, like a lot of because the hippie movement, as far as I understand, it was kind of popping around on the as the like the beat poet kind of generation was kind of leaving,
Yeah, the
and as,
beatniks,
yeah, the
like,
beatniks, and as
yeah.
people were experimenting with drugs and developing new kinds of music and kind of freedom of expression and all that, that eventually gave way to, you know kind of a gnarly drug trade that kind of stomped out the hippie movement in terms of like
Are you
cocaine and
speaking?
harder drugs,
Uh-huh.
kind of infiltrated those same spaces where hippies would hang out, and everything like that. So that original movement is definitely not around anymore. There's individual people that are still alive you can talk to, older people, but it kind of gave way to like a just a drug culture just centered around making money.
I see. So in your perspective, uh, much of the youth today who I either identify as hippies or are living in alignment with what they believe to be the hippie movement are not as politically active as the original hippies who are reacting in resistance to the Vietnam War. They're maybe in some cases less courageous today. In other cases, they're less outspoken and they're more kind of living a chill life. Is that kind of what you're implicating, or am I totally
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Just a less politically active life and this is just like generalizations, but yeah, just like
yeah.
more of like I mean, shit, like I live in Northern California, like um I get it. Just the desire to kind of want to live in peace in the woods and stuff. Like I totally get that. I'm not like judging anyone for that, but yeah, it's like a less politically active culture, less of an activist culture. Like I wouldn't equate a social or political activists with a hippie as much nowadays. I guess
No,
that's
it's
like the
more
main
part of the punk
main
movement.
difference.
Would you say the punk is more kind of holding that baton to so to speak? Is that what you're kind of implicating or not really?
Yeah, I think so. I think if you were to speak to the average, if you were just to pick out a random, you know, punk rocker or something out of a random pool of people, and you picked out a random someone who identifies as a hippie out of a random pool of people,
Yeah.
more times than not, the punk will have more to say, more defined, clear opinions to say about the political situation what should be done, what should not be done. Whereas the hippie will more likely just kind of be like, oh, everyone should just do what they want, and
Yeah.
just focus on yourself and just cultivate your own inner, peace or whatever, and the world will follow you, as long as you cultivate you know, your own development, then you're fine, which is, I see like one part of that. Like I kind of like, because of course you need to work on yourself and before you can try to change, other people or the way people see things. But that's not all. That's not all that people can do.
Yeah, there's also work that needs to be done in the external world.
Yeah.
It's not just all within yourself.
Yeah. But yeah, I hope that makes sense. Like if you were to pick a couple people nowadays, I think someone who's a punk is more likely going to have like some strong opinions.
Yeah. And I know you've already talked about this a little bit, but is there any more that you can touch on to the punk ethos that actually is empowering the individuals who uh
Yeah,
like
totally.
for like let's say there's a listener right now and they're 16 years old or 15 years old and they're listening to this conversation and that maybe they wear some punk clothing or they're doing some kind of like uh counterculture like hairstyles or whatever, and they're listening to different like musicians and interviews of punks, but they still feel afraid to speak their mind. Sometimes they feel afraid to do certain actions that will kind of like make people think more about uh the like normal culture. Like what would you say to them to try to empower them to have more confidence, conviction, and courage to live in alignment with what they believe are their highest values and to try to have a
Hmm.
higher benefit to the external world?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a hard one because I would, if I was talking to them, I would tell them that they just should do whatever they can to find like the community that clicks with them. That's like the key thing because and it's hard to do.
So
And
there's courage in numbers. There's empowerment in having a community of other people that you know you're not alone. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, yeah, I guess. And what I really mean by that is like you just got to find whatever, whether it's like, I mean that goes back to the whole like kind of the aesthetic of like punks and hippies and everything, or just like the fashion, the clothing, like all that is it's kind of like it can be like vain and superficial, but it's also like a signal that you signifier that you're like kind of, can be kind of a weirdo. You're into this music. You're wanting to form a band. Like,
Yeah.
whatever it is, you're like you're interested in history and looking at like
How
political or like some kind of heroes the throughout history that have really like changed the tide at like at a crucial point in history, like during the like kind of the Spanish like anarchist like revolution in like the 30s or like something like that. You're into like these more obscure parts in history that haven't been talked about as much like in school or something. Like there's a lot of like baggage that goes along with being like punk, I guess. So yeah,
so
the
both
first thing that I
in
would
go ahead.
yeah, the first thing I would say is like just try to find others that are like that. Like it would depend on whatever town you live in or whatever, because all towns and cities have different levels of like a punk scene or a metal scene or whatever. But you just got to find those first couple people, whether it's like through the music and you see people at a record store, or you see, show flyers and go to a show, or like cafe in town, or you just need to, you live in a really bad place to be you, whatever that means. And you got to just move somewhere else as early as you can. Just try to just keep searching, I guess. Just keep trying to find it. Because the more people you meet who, you know, feel that same way, the web just keeps going and going, and you'll meet more and more people, and eventually you'll have some kind of community.
And in
It
turn the confidence to speak
Yeah,
your mind
exactly.
with the
And those
conviction.
first few people might not be like your lifelong friends or something, but
Yeah.
it just, it's such an interconnected culture, not only in just like the US, but like internationally, like, um, whether it's punk
Yeah.
music or like
Yeah, there's punk movements
enclaves of,
all over the world in countries
yeah,
everywhere. Yeah.
exactly. And you can, it's one of those things you kind of meet people in it, you feel more at ease with people when you meet them in a space like that, because you kind of have a lot of assumptions and stuff out of the way already.
Yeah, birds of
If that,
the same feather flock
right.
together, or something like
Yep.
that. Yeah, you feel at
Yeah.
home and at ease, and with people that have similar mindset and values and lifestyle as yourself.
Yeah, totally.
Awesome. Are there any last words or things you want to talk on?
The only thing I would say is like the, because I was thinking a little more about like the hitchhiking and all that
Yeah.
stuff when when you when we were talking about this, meeting
Yeah.
up to do this. And I, looking back, I was kind of thinking that traveling, like, just aim kind of more or less aimlessly, like I had kind of vague plans on people I wanted to see or places to go and everything, but um traveling like that, I feel like it was kind of a, um what do you call it, kind of like a trial that a young person needs to go through in order to like kind of become a, not an adult, but like a different level of person.
It's like a maturation process of some kind, like yeah, like
Yeah.
trials and tribulations or something. You're just going through and you're getting experiential knowledge. So what did you learn from that? It just was like a growing
Yeah,
experience, or what how did you grow?
I feel like we kind of lack a any kind of formal coming of age process in our culture, where you're, a young, naive, you know more innocent version of yourself, and you go through these trials and you develop more knowledge about the world, and you have to do something difficult, and whatever that is. And to me, like, a long journey just was the best way to do that. And you know getting great stories out of it, and just seeing the world on your own terms, and just kind of on your own terms. I mean, you're kind of at the mercy of a lot of different things, but
Yeah.
just you it was just something that I made happen by myself. So that was
Yeah.
like the main one of the main parts of it for me. Yeah, it was like a process that I really wanted. I realized kind of later that I just really wanted to do that by myself.
So again, for younger listeners or even elder listeners who haven't done much traveling, if you'd suggest, don't just imagine it or talk about it. Muster up the courage and get out there in some way or another and see more of the world. It will empower you and give you insights and
Oh yeah, definitely.
that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
absolutely. I would recommend that if you have the ability to travel, whatever that looks like. If
Yeah.
you, whether it's here or if you go internationally somewhere, like, if there's someone who's on the fence about that and you can make that work, yeah, definitely do it.
Go and do it.
Because to me, that was like one of the highest points in my whole life is just these is traveling. Like, it's like one of my main things. I love it more than anything. So yeah, definitely. And I've learned a lot from just not being kind of afraid to go new places. Like when I was first traveling on the West Coast trip I was talking about, I hadn't been to like north of San Francisco really that much, or to Portland, Oregon, or to even just places that now are just like, a few hours drive away and don't seem like a big deal. But yeah, it was amazing just seeing the whole northern half of the US, or on the West Coast at least. And then later on going out and you know seeing places that are not even that far, like Arizona or New Mexico or something, but just there's so much to do out there. Utah, Colorado, whatever. It's just, there's, you could spend like years and not see everything out in any of those places, especially out west where it's just like rugged landscapes everywhere and trail systems. And whatever you're into, mountain biking or yeah, it's a great place to be, and I would definitely recommend exploring.
Rad. Thank you so much for jumping on the podcast, and it's
Yeah, man.
awesome to hear your voice again.
Yeah. All right, bud. Good to talk to you.
Bye, Kane.
See you later.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Cuboid podcast. Please have a nice day.